Hello, everyone. Steven Soos here, your host of Advocates with Steven Soos. And my guest today is Cam Wilson. He's a mortgage agent with the Canuck Mortgage Group. He's a great guy and he's a huge financial advocate in the city of St. Catharines and beyond. I'm so excited to have him on the show. And this show is proudly sponsored by Leanna Villela. I got to get the names right this time. Leanna Villela, Cam Wilson, Jim Diodati, and Mike Britton. So we thank everybody for their support. And if you want to sponsor the show, please get a hold of me and I would be more than happy to assist. And then I forgot Carmen DeRose. He would smack me if I forgot him. So Carmen DeRose, Thorold City Councilor, he's moved more motions on the state of emergency for mental health, homelessness, and addiction than anyone. It's time for the politicians, most of the politicians, to get off their rear ends and fight for this emergency before we end up having a situation that happened in the city of Belleville. So don't shoot the messenger, Cam. It's just how it is. So, Cam,
Sorry, go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah. I'm just going to start by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Yeah. First of all, thanks for having me on your show today. I've known you for a while, Steve, and I appreciate the work you do. And not a lot of people, take the initiative in life outside their own personal sphere of influence, right? Their own personal life to actually get out there publicly and try to help the community. People like to complain about how things are, but not a lot of people actually take action like you have, Steve. And power to you, and thank you, for doing that. And I saw what you did with the motion for homelessness and mental health. We got a lot of money for that in the region. Billions of dollars it ended up getting from the province, and that's because of you, right? So that just shows that anybody is capable of changing the world, right? So don't. A lot of people out there, nobody matters, and I'm a nobody, and I don't matter, and I can't change anything, and da. You're wrong. You can, and you're the actual problem. It's not always the rich and the politicians who are wrong. There's a lot of the general public out there. You kind of earned your situation.
Thank you for that. It's much appreciated. Now, Cam, is there an opportunity where you can turn up your volume?
Sure.
By chance? Perfect.
I'm as high as I can go now.
All right, that's fine. So, Cam, we're going to talk about housing today. So that's a great topic because it's one of the biggest issues, if not the biggest issue, affecting our region. So my first question is, do you support, Cam, a vacant homes tax for your community?
That's a good question, Steve. To be honest, I haven't really thought about it particularly on that particular topic. What I would say is there's some downside to it in that it would potentially, cause some investors in the market to perhaps not go that route. So, the business world, there's a corporate business world and small business world, right? We all know that. No different from the housing market. You have your institutional landlords that own, thousands or, whatever properties, apartment buildings, they have big money. And then you have your mom and pop, small landlords who own a couple properties or rent out, whatever, right? Small people trying to get ahead. So, a policy like a vacant, a tax is going to hurt the poorest of the investors. So it's going to marginalize the mom and pop investors and give the market more so to the larger players, the more, the corporate structure. So that would be the only side I could see, is that it would have the potential to aid the corporate side versus helping the small business side. But, there are a lot of, unfortunately, there's some landlords out there or people in general that do leave their homes derelict and vacant. And, that's not good for the rental pool or for the maintenance of the property. So again, there's arguments either way. Now, what do I feel personally? I know a lot of people are going to hate me for it, but I'm pro-development. And the only reason I'm I'm from Niagara, I'm from St. Catharines. I like our Niagara feel, our single-family home neighborhoods, all that stuff. I like the peace and quiet, the lack of traffic, all that stuff. But I also recognize that we need job creation and we need more tax revenue to support the very services that we rely on, our healthcare, our streets, our school buses, our schools. All that stuff relies on tax dollars. Well, guess what? Now, again, you're going to hate me for it, but the frogs and the raccoons do not pay property taxes, guys. I love you guys. And I know you think you're right in your own mind, but in the real world, we need money for people. People need money. Money comes from taxes. So property tax. So if you build a neighborhood, a brand new neighborhood of 1,000 homes, guess who has to build those homes? People. People have, and guess what? People get paid to build homes. Money, right? So if there's no jobs, if there's no building going on, there's no jobs. And if there's no jobs, people can't spend the money in the community, which what do people who have jobs do? They buy more homes. So it's a symbiotic relationship. So the people that build the homes need to, so development is good, right? And there's a lot of open land in Niagara that will generate those new neighborhoods, create that new tax, those new property tax revenues, which will support, local programming and local needs that we have as citizens, right? But Steve, go ahead.
That's a great point. So there has to be responsible development. Throwing development in the middle of an aging neighborhood that does not have the infrastructure capacity to sustain such a development is not a good idea. But you mentioned lands, and so there are many lands that are appropriate for those developments. And I am not really in favor of the cookie cutter development that we're seeing. I think many of the design concepts could be better and that side of things. So yes, development is important, but it has to be responsible development, and taxpayers shouldn't be fully on the hook for subsidizing developers. Developers need to bring some money to play the game. So that's all important stuff. In terms of the vacant home tax, I do support it in a way because there are some very admirable people that landlords could rent to, like veterans, for example. So that's one important aspect of a vacant homes tax, because the price of housing is so high, a lot of these homes are sitting vacant. They're being built, but they're empty. It's just like Linmar and Welland. They built Linmar. They promised a bunch of jobs. They didn't mention that the EV market was, in a sense, failing, and now zero people work there. That could have been a great rehab center, a tiny homes development, or both. So you talk about development opportunities. Tiny homes is a great opportunity for developers to show that they care about the issue of homelessness, but to also make those crucial investments in the community and have a high return on investment. That's my rant.
That's a good rant, and I agree with you, Steve. Responsible development's critical. Like, I'm not suggesting that we just carte blanche, just put up a bunch of crap that falls down in 5 years. Reasonable development. That's well thought out, right? Not just about the money, but for the overall picture. But you brought up about tiny homes, and as you know, Leanna Vallela, Councillor Vallela in Welland, has been a very strong proponent for tiny homes. So as you know, Steve, I've got a bit of experience working with government in my capacity as a mortgage agent. I know people will call me a salesperson because and they're understanding that's what I am. And I am that as well. But the job allows you to do more than that, frankly. I'm not an employee. I'm self-employed, and I'm incorporated in my own right. So I'm an expert on mortgages. I'm not just a slimy used car salesman like people think mortgage brokers are, because, and that's why I was able to change government policy in St. Catharines. You brought up St. Catharines doing community work, and one of the things my knowledge with respect to banking and mortgages was able to achieve was to essentially recalibrate the capital reserve structure of the city of St. Catharines. And that Mike Britton championed that. Councillor Britton championed that motion through City Council, got it approved. And they basically restructured the portfolio to allow credit unions more access to manage the funds, rather than the banks having 95% of the portfolio. So ended up being a 50-50 split after I came with some certain information about the banking system. And of course, the city got a better ROI due to that after the credit unions took more. So I do have a lot of experience with government to a degree. But I would say the tiny home thing. So I did, when Councillor Vallela and I were talking about it a couple of years ago, I did run it up the flagpole of the CMHC, which is Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation. to see what their interest was in funding them, because if you could put a tiny home up for $50K, the down payment's $2,500. Minimum 5% down payment, right? That's the minimum you can do in Canada. So if you have a tiny home for $50K or $100K, people only got to come up with $2,500, $5,000. Perhaps there could be a grant program for tiny homes that the municipality can encourage, and get their money back on the sale after the fact. Because again, we're talking about such small amounts of money, but it's getting people in a market into an appreciating asset like a home, right? So even it might be a tiny home, they still appreciate it over time because there's still excess demand, or compared to the amount of actual homes that are in place, right? So you'll still see appreciation, but it's a good thing because the region already does that. I mean, Niagara Region Regional Housing, which is a department of the Niagara Region, they offer a 5% grant program for first-time home buyers. So as long as the home, I believe, is under $630,000 or something, the family makes less than $113,000 a year, and they have less than $30,000 in assets, they qualify to get into this program on a waiting list. And I've had multiple clients buy a home. They had zero money themselves, and then the government gave them, the 15 or 20,000 they needed to get the down payment for the $450,000 home. So it is possible. It's just, but there is the will. So from CMHC, Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation, they told me that they have no policies in place that would stop them from funding tiny homes. So the insurer is fine. Here's the caveat, though. The lenders aren't. So the lenders aren't there yet. So the big banks, whatever, they're not quite there yet where they want to start funding tiny homes, right? So, because again, if you introduce tiny homes, it's going to be something that's going to be, across the country, right? So it's going to create a precedent, and it's going to impact the market significantly, because right now you have all these home builders like Mountain View, et cetera, that have their own business model, right? So that the builders, basically what has to happen is the lenders and the builders have to come together and say, yeah, we see an opportunity. So Mountain View creates a new division or whatever builder, our tiny home division or whatever, because that's what it's got. Because if you just introduce it in the wrong way, it's going to hurt the economy potentially, right? And it's going to really displace a lot of businesses. It could create unintended consequences that really harm people, right? Instead of helping. So it's got to be delivered in such a way where everybody's kind of in agreement on how it's rolled out to the public, right? So, but there is the will from CMHC. So and at the end of the day, they're the ones that really, really have the final say. So the will's there, just that now it's the lenders and the builders kind of got to get together and let it go to the public, right?
Well,
So.
I always say that answer was spectacular. I always say this is why you have to have Cam Wilson on. That's important. People have to learn this stuff. But I always say the only limit to the imagination, there are no limits to the imagination. So, we have to get serious. And it's unfortunate that the region just so quickly turned down the concept of tiny homes. It is certainly more cost effective than paying these high rents with substantial increases. And we'll get into that in future, but we have a packed agenda and limited time. So I want to quickly ask you just a quick answer on this. Should foreign home buyers be banned in Canada?
I don't know if I would say ban per se. I would say that there should be some type of major benefit or fee or levy or some type of financial compensation that Canada or the Canadian taxpayer or the people that are in Canada prior to the foreign money coming in, some way that they're benefiting. Because one of the major reasons housing prices accelerated so much in the past decade and made housing very unaffordable for most people is foreign money. There was a lot of, foreign interests in Asia and other parts of the world that pumped in many, many billions of dollars coming in through Vancouver and Toronto, and they bought up a lot of homes back to your vacant home, right? So a lot of foreign people with significant wealth see Canada as a great place to invest. So instead of putting the money in a bank somewhere or whatever, they said, you know what, we'll just buy a house in Canada property. Who cares if we leave it vacant? We're making 15% a year in appreciation. Doesn't matter. So it was not money laundering per se, but some people would call it that. But essentially, the Canadian government allowed the foreign world to dump hundreds of billions of dollars of capital in the property market as an investment tool, and at the same time they essentially allowed the average Canadian to take the consequence of that action, which is an unaffordable market for the domestic population, right? So yeah, that's I think that I don't know if I would call it a ban, because we still need foreign capital to a degree, but there should be limits, or should be some type of system around that capital that also protects the average Canadian's interests as well, without marginalizing them in the process. That's what I will say.
See, the reason I like to have you on, Cam, is because you take a balanced approach to the housing issues and a common sense approach. And I really appreciate that. So, my next quick fire question is this: while in council with the assistance of yours truly,
Right.
they passed a motion that asked the government to support more medium priced supply in the housing market. So the housing crisis is being caused by a supply and demand issue. It's economics 101. If
Right.
you have less supply and more demand, price goes up. So
That's
with the medium price supply, there is an opportunity here to open up more housing stock, because it would allow for housing to be more affordable for
correct.
seniors who are downsizing and
Sure.
youth trying to enter the housing market. So,
Sure.
very quickly, where do you stand on the concept of medium price supply?
Okay, so I'm glad you brought this up. So I've seen a couple things happening over the past 3 years or so at the provincial level, which is, from my perspective, essentially designing the landscape or the environment to allow what you want and a lot of people want to see happen in the future. So it's very important that we create more supply, much more supply, to mitigate price appreciation. So that the prices going like this, we want them to go more like this. We want the prices of housing, the average house, not, super affluent. We don't care about the house that's worth $10 million. We care about the average, most people. That's what we're talking about right now. So we want to design the system essentially where we're growing the housing stock year over year, annual growth pattern. We want to bring that very similar, the same pattern of growth, the same elevation. We want to bring that parallel with median income growth. And the reason we want to do that is we want to create a sustainable housing market that is accessible to most Canadians. We don't want to create a have-not country. That's where we were trending prior to 2020. So of course, we've lived through a very interesting time in the last 5 years. And when on TV during COVID, there was the television was telling us we're in this together and we're going to come out stronger. And that is the case. Our leaders and our owners are very generous and good people. Sometimes we lose perspective in life. Nobody's perfect. Not Mr. Rothschild, not Mr. Rockefeller, not Mr. Bush, not Mr. Carney, not Mr. Pierre Poilievre. Nobody. Not me, not you, Steve, not the guy shoveling shit for $3 an hour and doesn't know how to tie his own shoes. We're all the same in that sense. So what's going on right now is the big folks are restructuring the world to make it a little more accommodating for the end user, i.e. the average person. And how they're going to do that, so far from what I can see, is the provincial government's passed a piece of legislation called Cutting the Red Tape Act, and then as well, I believe they did the Strong Mayors Act. And those two pieces of legislation are critical to increasing the supply at a municipal level. So there's all sorts of incentives at the federal and provincial level now to essentially incentivize municipalities to be pro-development. Now, a lot of people aren't going to like that, but people unfortunately don't know any better. And I love them. But you're talking about people that have grade 8, grade 10 education, watch mainstream television all day, play games on their phone. They're not really in the know. They think they are, but they're not in the real world. And we're here to help them. We are here to protect our people who we love. And so, like I say, sometimes we lose perspective. You imagine you're very, very wealthy, billions of dollars, and you're fourth or fifth generation money. How are you going to be able to relate to most people? It's virtually impossible. And especially if you're that wealthy and those families, you're born into a situation where you're surrounded by yes people. You have butlers and servants and managers, and everyone wants to say yes to you so they can get ahead in life and climb the ladder because you own the ladder. So they're more about telling you what they think they want, that you want to hear, rather than telling you the truth. So unfortunately, our leaders have been shielded from the truth, just like the common person is. shielded from the truth in a lot of sense. So it's very similar. So anyways, we've kind of hit an inflection point in 2020 where there's peace between the classes. So essentially the owners, recognize that people aren't just a number on a piece of paper, and they owe more to us than just basics. There is a level of respect that should be afforded to most people. So stuff like the cutting the red tape act, Strong Mayors Act, essentially gives more power to executive and municipality to override planning departments and councils where there may be objections to development, residential development. And now that can be overridden. So now we can develop, even though some people might object, but those people, frankly, their opinion is wrong. And I know, who am I to say that, but I'm saying it. And that's the way it is. And it doesn't matter, because we're going to do it regardless. And you're going to come along for the ride. And that's all there is to it. So
you can say whatever you want on my show. I don't censor things like the legacy media does. So it's interesting you bring up strong mayors legislation, because I think it pertains to the specific municipality that you're talking about, because you have City of Welland that did not need strong mayor powers to build a very healthy amount of housing stock. So that's an interesting concept. Okay, we got a little bit of time left, not too much. I'm respecting that you have a very busy schedule, and for some reason
I love being on here. Steve, like I said, I'm proud of you with what you've done. You and I both, we have a bit of a rough past, but we got ahead of that, and we're on the front side now. But I enjoy watching. I enjoy seeing you, bring up unpopular topics, or put the the crunch to the people in charge, because we got to, like I said, you got to stand up for yourself, right? So, but like I said, I think we're going in a good spot. I think the world would be in a good place. Mark Carney, a lot of people don't get it, but this is a former central bank deputy, or chair of the Bank of Canada, and governor of the Bank of Canada, and governor of the United Kingdom's central bank. So this is unprecedented. We've never had a central bank governor as a prime minister. There's never been a central bank governor who's been a president of the United States or a prime minister in Australia. So this is the first central bank governor to take a political role, frankly, in history. So, and it just happens to be Canada, of all places. And our current Tiff Macklem just happens to be a board of director member of the Basel Committee in Switzerland. So the Basel Committee in Switzerland is an unelected body that essentially has members on the board who are, governors of independent central banks around the world. So our small little Canada, 40 million people, somehow our friggin' governor of our Bank of Canada just so happens to be on that board. Now the Basel Committee, for all intents and purposes, set government or set policy for the entire world. So when they make an edict or bring up something or have a policy that they want, it just so happens that places like Canada, the US, or those central banks and those domestic countries unilaterally adopt those suggestions from the Basel Committee. So for all, like I always say, the Basel Committee is the world government, because in the real world, law dictates behavior, but frankly, money does, right? So if you don't have any money, you can't go on a vacation. So money dictates your behavior far more than the law does. So in the real world, the law really isn't the chief. The banks are. The money, the central bank is the law, right? And then the government is under the bank, right? But I know in the way it's spun to people, the government's in charge and the banks are different. But in the real world, it's the opposite. So, but anyways, that's enough conspiracy theory nonsense. I know I'm crazy, guys.
That's okay. You're in good company. I was very smart today, because every segment, for some reason, someone decides to call me. My ringer is not on today. Wayne Olson, Pelham Regional Councilor, calling me. Wayne, I'm busy. I'll get to it. So.
But listen. All I want to do, Steve, to leave, if anyone watched it to the end, or people watch this, guys, we're going in a good direction now. It's going to be a good world moving forward. There's going to be more money in infrastructure, more capital afforded to the public system, whether that be your schools, healthcare, creating a reasonable environment in terms of housing prices. They're working on it, guys. It takes time. You change things too quick, the workers get displaced, because everyone is dependent on how things are today. The economy today is what your job is tied to. So if you change the economy quickly, you're going to displace thousands, millions of workers overnight. The businesses are going to go bankrupt and everyone gets hurt. So change has got to go very slow, slow enough where you're helping people, but not fast enough where you're hurting people. It's a fine balance. So God bless our leaders.
Yes. Well, you don't get to leave until you answer my final question, Cam.
Yes,
So
sir. Go for it.
tell whoever's waiting for you, Steve Soos said.
Yes,
But
sir.
purchasing power is certainly important. It's a conversation for another day. It's important in housing, food, and whatever we do. Purchasing power is a key aspect of the economy. But here's the thing here. Here's my final question.
Right.
So, affordable housing, there's only about 186 affordable housing units for the city of Welland with 55,000 people, approximately.
Okay.
So, do you think that the government relies too heavily on mortgage and rental subsidies? How about fix the economy? How about tackle inflation by reducing borrowing so that people have that purchasing power to participate economically? I just want your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, that's a good point, Stephen. That's exactly what's happening right now, essentially. So what's going on is essentially globalization is dead. And from what I've been told by people far higher than me on the totem pole, is we're essentially going back to a regional governance model. So we'll have, just like in the 1960s, we got a lot of our resources in Canada, the US, they were manufactured and produced in the US and then sold back to the public. Well, they made a change in the 60s and they sent everything over to China and Vietnam and all that stuff to get processed over there and then sold back here. Well, that's over. So, one of the outcomes of COVID is, you heard about it during COVID. Oh, we're afraid of the supply chains and this and that. Oh, we got to bring manufacturing back to North America because the supply chains are threatened if there's ever a war or blah, 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 blah. Right. So that's exactly what's happening, Steve. They're redesigning the world to, like I said earlier in the conversation, to be a little more accommodating to the end user. Still, of course, bringing back manufacturing and a lot of development back into places like North America. Well, who's that going to benefit? It's going to benefit the average person, of course. Right. So that's essentially what they're trying to do is, like I said, back in the 60s and the 50s, you had a good job at a high school, pension, one person could work, it was great. Right. And then things changed. So they want to bring things back kind of to where they used to be. It's not easy to do. That's why interest rates have got to be held a little higher than they were prior to COVID, is what I was told. We're going to keep the rate market a little higher than prior to COVID. So for right now, prime's 4.95. Prior to COVID, it was 3.95. So there's maybe another half a point in cuts ahead of us. Who knows? But probably not much more than that. And then that would keep us a little higher than we were prior to COVID. And like I said, they took Benjamin Tall's the person I heard that from, and he's one of the chief economists with CIBC, right? And he said off the record behind closed doors, essentially globalization is dead and we're returning to more regional way of doing things and manufacturing. A lot of commerce is coming back, and it's basically it. So you're going to bring back production back to North America. The workforce benefits instead of working at Walmart, $12 an hour or whatever. There's a good strong job with a pension and above average income, right? So that's what I was told is going down, and it looks like that. Look at all the things opening up. You got that new battery plant in Port Colborne, and all the different things going on, right? So you hear the stories of Apple bringing back factories from China, so it is what it is, right? So I'll have to see what happens. Like I said, that's what it appears that they're trying to do. So
I find it interesting that the definition of affordable housing outlined by the government is that when people are spending 30% of their income, they're spending way higher of a percentage than that on their housing. So that definition certainly needs to be amended. It's a conversation. Yeah, it's a conversation for a different day. And perhaps we will have you back on to discuss Indigenous housing options and more support for highlighting Indigenous housing options that are made available. And because Indigenous people like myself are disproportionately affected by housing. So that's a big one that I'd like to dive into.
The key, Steve, frankly, sorry to interrupt you. The key to helping people is financial literacy education. That's the key. And it's not taught in the schools for obvious reasons. That's it. Once you teach people the reality of the system that they live in, not the front picture that people believe is real, but the real system that they live in, not the fake one that people think is real. I know I sound like a nutcase, but I'm not crazy, guys. I just, have certain information that Some people don't. So my perception of reality might be different from other people's, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
You're
So
not
anyway,
crazy. You're not
that,
crazy. Well, we
that
can't hang out anymore.
that's the key, Steve. Frankly, it comes down to real education with people, right, and teaching them the reality of the system. Because once people get that, that gives them hope. Once they see through the curtain and they see the corruption and they see how it works, not because people know something's wrong, but they don't know, they can't quite figure out what it is. But I'm able to bring that to them and show them, what is corrupt. So once you teach people that, it gives them hope, because now they can see for the first time, because before they couldn't see.
It's interesting, right? Because
But I gotta listen, Steve. I love to take you on more, but I gotta split in like literally 2 minutes. So let's.
that's fine. We're closing up. We're closing up. I got you.
Okay. Okay.
It's interesting because the school board is working very hard to make sure I don't become the first Indigenous trustee, which I think is a big mistake, because
I don't
I
know.
would love to.
I
I would
don't know
love
what
to,
that has to do with
and
you being a-
they're making up all kinds of rumors about me, and it's politics as usual.
Steve, the reason they don't want you has nothing to do with that you're Indigenous. It has to do with that you're going to hold them to account, and you're going to do this. So usually in their little clique, their little group they have, they all shut up and they collect their paycheck, right? So Steve's going to say, hey, wait, this doesn't look right. That's not right. That's not right. That's not right. They don't want you in there because they'll have to do work. That's why.
Fixing systems is what I do. So well, I would love to participate with you on advocating to the school board to teach students about financial literacy and how to participate in the housing market. So I'm gonna close up. All right.
That's great, Steve. Let's get on it, buddy. Anyways, thank you so much for having me on your show. Thanks to the sponsors, and you have a great day, my friend.
All right. Thank you, Cam Wilson. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Advocates with Steven Soos. Our guest today, Cam Wilson, Canuck Mortgage Group. If you're looking for a mortgage, you go to Cam. If you go somewhere else, I'm going to get mad at you. Thanks, Cam.
See you, Steve. Have a good one. See you guys. Cheers.